So, if the top 10% start to spend less money, what happens to the economy? Um, so, this is a thought that's been on my mind on my journey to becoming a net worth millionaire investor. I'm trying to do everything that I can to, learn more about finance, markets, and things of the like, and just use that to ultimately make better decisions to secure my financial future. And I hope stuff like this helps somebody out there as well. And one thing I've been learning about recently is the effect that the spending behavior of the top 10% and what that has on the overall economy at large. And there was a study recently done by Moody's Analytics that detailed that roughly the top 10% is accounting for nearly half of all the spending in our economy. And it's really wild to think about, right? But that seems to be what's increasingly happening. And so basically, what that's ultimately saying, right, is that like as fewer and fewer people begin to account for more spending, right, then ultimately what begins to happen is that when you look at the grand picture, it ultimately means that a lot more people are increasingly doing worse than they might have been, 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? Because in relation to the whole top 10%, now accounting for half, back in, I think like roughly 30 years ago, I believe what the study said, that number was more around like 36% or so, right? So clearly a huge difference over just 30 years. And very likely when inflation and things begin to pick up, right, which it looks like is increasingly becoming more common, that number is probably only going to get more exacerbated as time goes on. So when I begin to look at all these different factors that can affect, the future of our economy, right? Like when we have these AI shifts happening, gold hitting record highs, and so on. When you begin to look at this picture now and you see fewer people accounting for the overall spending, then in my mind, that begins to raise a serious red flag because, you could say, from what it looks like, roughly 70% of our GDP, right, is accounted for through consumption. And if fewer and fewer people are accounting for more of that consumption, right, then ultimately that means that at some point, if everybody else is not catching up, that ultimately means these corporations have a shrinking base to pull money from. And at some point, unless there is some big boost in income somewhere, then that will eventually have downstream effects, right? And as more of these wealthy people continue to, consolidate their wealth in assets, then if those assets begin to depreciate because these companies are ultimately making less, then what does that mean for the future? So, yeah, that's my thought for the day.